Welcome back to Upside Down Data. Let's talk about Solana. If you've been following the crypto markets, then you know that Solana has been a very strong performer in this market cycle. We're talking, if you go from the bottom of the lowest wick here all the way up to the highest price it's gotten to so far this cycle, we're talking about over a 2,500% move to the upside. Absolutely bonkers. And especially when you consider that this is not some small market cap meme coin doing this. This is Solana, which is currently number 5 on the rankings by market cap in the crypto market. And even though Solana didn't start there, it wasn't too far off down in the rankings. So for an asset to go that far, that fast, being already such a large market cap asset is quite impressive. And I think a lot of people have taken notice of the fact that Solana has been doing quite well. So what I want to talk about in this video is, can we expect this performance to continue? So I want to talk about some fundamental factors that are happening with Solana, some usage activity, things like that can give us a sense of where it stands from a more fundamental perspective. Then I want to talk about some of our models are seeing about its price action and where that might be going next. So to start off, I want to talk about where Solana sits in terms of DeFi usage. So DeFi is, of course, a sector that is quite important for a lot of layer 1 protocols. It's one of the things that has gotten them a lot of usage and a lot of activity. So Ethereum has always been the king of DeFi, and it still remains as such. Protocols that come below it kind of change around, and it's notable that Solana is currently sitting here at number 4 in terms of total value locked in its DeFi ecosystem. It's also interesting to note that when you look at the active addresses in the last 24 hours for Solana, it's quite high. It's only being beaten by the likes of, for example, Tron, Binance Smart Chain, and, for example, Polygon down here. But it's beating Ethereum, and it's also beating Bitcoin, interestingly enough, suggesting that a lot of usage is actually happening on Solana. Now, active addresses can mean a lot of things. This will include things like bots, and Solana being such a cheap layer 1 protocol to use, bot activity is probably going to be more elevated than some of the more expensive ones. But it's still notable that there's a lot of activity, and especially when you compare it to certain other ones like Avalanche, for example, it is significantly higher in terms of its active addresses, which is a good sign. And we go over here and we just flip over to its actual chart. So to kind of look at the total value lock over time, it's still not back to where it was at the height of the 2021 cycle, but clearly moving up. And one of the things I think is actually really interesting to look at is not just total value locked, but actual revenue being generated by the protocol. So this is basically revenue, that's transaction fees, things like that, that are being generated from people actually using the protocol. And this gives a really good idea of how much are people actually using it, because the more people spend to use it, the more valuable they must feel like it is to use that protocol. Why also be spending so much to use it? And we can see that at its height, at the peak of the meme coin mania, we're talking about almost $2 million a day going in revenue for Solana. Now it has fallen off since then. It's down at around 500,000 now. But notably, this is significantly higher than it was at the peak of the bull market in 2021. We really just didn't see that kind of sustained revenue happening. It was only at about 146K here at the top. So this is a paradigm shift, and it's one of those things that people always worry with layer 1 protocols. Can they actually be self-sustaining? Can they actually be generating enough transaction fees to make them viable and not just be reliant on inflation of their token, which is not necessarily sustainable? That's just printing tokens without there actually necessarily being something underlying it. With these fees, that suggests that there's a source of revenue for validators that's not just the emissions from the protocol, new tokens being created. So that's something that I think is very useful and is a good sign for Solana that's gotten all of this activity. Now, you could argue about how sustainable this activity will be. One of the things that's really pushed it is meme coins. So Solana has kind of emerged as being meme coin central in some ways. It's kind of taken that from Ethereum, which used to be the place where most of the meme coins traded, and is now taking it to itself more or less. And a lot of the bigger ones that have come out, WIF, Bonk, some of these other ones have been on Solana. And it makes sense because Solana is very cheap to use. If you haven't used it before, it is a fraction of a dollar, just fraction of a cent even, to do transactions on the network. It's very easy to get your hands on Solana. All the major exchanges provide it or have it supported. So it's very easy to use. And so if you're going to be trading something like meme coins, most people don't want to be spending, potentially hundreds of dollars on a transaction like they would on Ethereum. They'd much rather do it on Solana, where they can do it for fractions of a penny. So it makes a lot of sense that that activity has started to move over to Solana. And I think that's what we can see is really being the main driver of this. So you can argue about how sustainable this will be. Really, meme coins had a bit of a season of a mania that happened over this time that has now been cooling off. So who knows if Solana certainly seems unlikely it can just stake its hat in saying that it'll forever be sustainable based on meme coin trading on it. That's unlikely. But at least it is showing those signs of life. And this is better than a lot of other layer ones can say for themselves. A lot of other alternative layer ones beyond Ethereum, they can't really boast these kind of numbers, especially these kind of crazy revenue numbers. So Solana at least has that going for it. Now the question will be, can it capitalize on that and build more sustainable revenue drivers beyond just meme coin trading? So we'll have to wait and see, but certainly it's a step in the right direction that's gotten a lot of attention. Now it needs to try to capitalize on it. Okay, so that's some of the things that have been happening with Solana that's certainly gotten a lot of DeFi value locked on it now, and certainly a lot of revenue generated, a lot of transaction and volume has been taking place on the protocol. Let's talk now about what some of our models see in its price action and where they think it might be going next. So this is our short-term upside downside potential indicator, or UDPI. If you're not familiar, it's a risk model. So higher values mean higher risk, lower values mean lower risk. And it's short term in its time horizon. So days to weeks is what it's really caring about, or what it's reacting to is those shorter term movements. And so we can see with this model is it does a really good job of identifying these low risk points and these higher risk points going into local tops, as well as these bottoming points. And more recently, it did a good job of capturing these local short-term tops that Solana had been putting in and these local short-term bottoms, and then getting all the way up here to 3.5. 5 is the highest level on the scale. So pretty high up there at this peak here. So it really wasn't a surprise then that this acted as a local top for Solana when we got up there. Risk was getting quite high, and so it made sense that it would need to cool off. Now the good news is it has done exactly that. Risk has fallen notably in this correction, actually getting back down to levels similar to where it was back here at the local low in January, and actually a little bit below, really levels we haven't seen since all the way back in September of 2023. So this is a good sign for Solana. It means in the short term, it has cooled off a lot, and now it has a good amount of upside potential to work with if it wants to. So that's where I think if broader markets allow, we could actually see Solana put in some kind of a short-term movement right here. It would not surprise me at all. We've already seen risk tick up a little bit as prices start to move up. If we actually see price move up further here and then see short-term risks start to get back up to these higher levels. Now, part of that is going to be reliant on what broader markets do. So one of the things that's been happening as a backdrop to all of this is that the stock market had been correcting pretty notably, starting here in early April, then really going down into mid to late April, a deep correction. This is the S&P 500. But we also see this on the NASDAQ as well, both having a correction. Now, notably, more recently, we've started to see that potentially reverse. And so if this does more fully reverse and we see the stock market go back on its merry way, especially if it hits new all-time highs, that might be a green light for risk assets, which Solana at this point very much is, which then could allow it to have that kind of run, another leg up, and then let it chew up some of this realistic upside potential that it has. And moving on beyond the short term and look more at the longer to medium term for Solana, this model gives a probability estimate of how likely it is that Solana's price will be above where it is right now 6 months in the future. So if you're here at 0.93, that's a 93% chance that Sol's price will be higher than it is right now 6 months in the future. Whereas if you're all the way down here at 0.04, that's only a 4% chance that Solana's price will be above where it is now 6 months in the future. So you can see this model does a fantastic job of capturing these dynamics in the market where it's really bullish in the bull market as price goes up, 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 up. Then as we went and got to the all-time high, it started falling off a cliff, saying, I think that the longer term outlook now is starting to look much less positive. And indeed, off a cliff we went, down, 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 all the way down to below $10, starting here at almost 240. So that is the power of this model. It can look that projection. What is the projection going into the future? Is it bullish or is it bearish? And it does a very good job of capturing those directions. And then importantly, as we went into this next cycle, it flipped bullish up through here and then remained so all the way up through. So basically taking us all the way from the lows up through to where we got up to here above $200. A very nice capture that it managed to do here, capturing that entire move. And the important thing for where we are right now is it remains bullish. It's not as bullish as it maybe was in some of these earlier points, but still above 80%. So from its view, there's still a better than 80% chance that Sol's price will be above where it is right now, 6 months in the future. Now, that's not a 100% chance, but it's certainly a heck of a lot better than 5% or 4% like it was all the way back here before we had the nasty rest of the bear market through here. So basically, when I kind of look at these data together, then what I'm seeing is that in the short term, there's certainly room for upside for Solana. And the outlook remains bullish. That basically, from this model's perspective, if you're going to pick a side, it makes more sense to pick the bullish side than the bearish side. And so that's where, in my view, and especially if broader markets continue to move up, I think it's a very reasonable outlook. Now, obviously, it's not financial advice, and this is all data dependent. If suddenly the data look a lot more bearish, or the forecast model falls off a cliff, or if we suddenly start getting really high short-term UPI levels, then my outlook would change. That's the way that I like to navigate markets. I do not make these broad sweeping claims about what's going to happen in the next year, next 2 years, because no one knows that. What I do is I look at the data and see what are they telling me right now. Are they telling me that being bullish makes sense or being bearish makes sense? And then that's the outlook I choose. But if they would change, if the forecast model, for example, would fall all the way down here, I would change. I'm not just going to get attached to some narrative. I'm not going to be one of those people who says that we have to have this massive bull market that will peak in 2025. We very well could, but we might not. And it's really going to be data dependent. If the data remain consistent with that viewpoint, then that's a reasonable viewpoint to have. But if the data flip the other way, then I would change my view as well. That's why I prefer to do it that way and not just get stuck. So many people, for example, back here, we're saying Solana was going to $1,000 plus, only for them to hold their bags all the way down. That's not the way that I like to navigate markets. If the outlook changes, I will change my view. So again, none of this is financial advice. You should make your own opinions, but this is what I'm seeing with Solana right now. I think there's a lot of hopeful signs with it. We're seeing a lot of DeFi usage of it. We're seeing a ton of revenue, and that's a lot of it coming from people actually using the network. Although, of course, a lot of that has been from things like meme coin trading. But if we just look at the data, it still suggests that being bullish makes sense here. And it's not to say that that can't change, but for now, that is the outlook that the models are giving. And I think that'll be especially reinforced if we see broader markets continue to reinforce that outlook. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us over on X. A lot of updates for our models and more over there. And go to our website, partydigital.io, to see live data from our models and more.